In this episode, we focus on a discipline that separates hopeful detection programs from reliable ones, which is validating detections through analytic testing before you rely on them during a real attack. Many beginners assume that if a detection rule exists and sometimes produces alerts, it must be working, but that belief can be dangerously wrong. A detection can exist, yet fail silently on the most important behaviors, trigger constantly on harmless activity, or miss attacks because it depends on data that is incomplete or inconsistent. Attackers do not wait for you to get your detections perfect. They exploit the gaps you have not found yet, often by using techniques that are common but poorly validated. Analytic testing is the practice of checking whether your detections actually behave the way you think they behave, under conditions that represent real attacker behavior, and doing this regularly enough that change in your environment does not quietly break your coverage. The goal is to replace trust by assumption with trust by evidence, so the SOC can defend with confidence rather than hope. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is a companion to our course companion books. The first book is about the exam and provides detailed information on how to pass it best. The second book is a Kindle-only ebook that contains 1,000 flashcards that can be used on your mobile device or Kindle. Check them both out at cyber.author.me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. A helpful starting point is clarifying what it means to validate a detection, because validation is broader than confirming that an alert can be produced. Validation asks whether the detection triggers when the relevant behavior occurs, whether it triggers reliably across the environments where it should apply, and whether it triggers with enough context to support a fast, defensible triage decision. It also asks whether the detection is precise enough to be useful, meaning it does not overwhelm the team with false positives or require constant manual searching to interpret. For beginners, it is important to see that a detection has two responsibilities at once. It must be sensitive enough to catch meaningful behavior, and it must be specific enough to avoid drowning analysts in noise. Analytic testing evaluates both responsibilities by checking the detection's coverage and its operational usefulness. This is why validation is not a one-time event, because environments change, logs change, and attacker methods evolve, so detections can degrade over time without anyone noticing. A validated detection is not a promise of perfect security, but it is a rule you have tested enough to trust as part of your operating model. Analytic testing begins with understanding what the detection is supposed to catch at a behavioral level, because you cannot test a rule effectively if you do not understand its intent. Many detections are written in terms of events, patterns, or thresholds, but those details are only the implementation of an idea about attacker behavior. The test must reflect that idea, such as unusual privilege use, suspicious authentication patterns, unexpected access to sensitive resources, or abnormal process relationships. If the detection intent is vague, the test will be vague, and you will not learn much from the result. A disciplined approach starts by defining the behavior clearly, defining where it should occur, defining what evidence should exist if it occurs, and defining what the detection should output when it triggers. This creates a testable expectation that can be compared to reality. For beginners, it helps to think of this as writing down what you believe the detection is doing before you test it, so you can identify mismatches rather than rationalize them afterward. When intent is clear, testing becomes a way to confirm or correct your understanding. Another critical concept is that analytic testing is only as good as the data it relies on, because detections depend on telemetry, and telemetry is often the weakest link. If key assets do not produce the required logs, a detection may appear to work in some places while failing completely in others. If timestamps are inconsistent, correlations may break, causing detections to miss sequences or misinterpret timelines. If data fields are missing or inconsistent across systems, detection logic that depends on those fields may silently fail or produce unpredictable output. Analytic testing should therefore include validation of data prerequisites, meaning you confirm that the detection's required signals exist, are consistent, and are arriving in a usable form. This is especially important because many detection failures are not logic failures, but collection failures, and those failures can remain invisible until an incident proves them painfully. For beginners, it is useful to remember that detection testing is also a form of visibility testing, because it reveals where the SOC cannot observe behaviors reliably. When you uncover a data prerequisite failure, you have discovered a gap that an attacker could exploit. When you test a detection, you also need to consider scope, because a detection that works on one system may not work on another due to differences in configuration, logging, or normal behavior. A rule might be tuned for servers but too noisy for endpoints, or tuned for one business unit's workflow but misleading in another. Scope testing means you evaluate where the detection applies and whether it behaves appropriately across those contexts. This is one reason analytics is important, because you can segment results by asset type, by environment, and by criticality, revealing where the detection is strong and where it is weak. For beginners, it helps to think of detections as products that must work across a user base, with different user behavior patterns, rather than as single-purpose scripts. A detection that performs well only in a narrow context might still be valuable, but it should be deployed and communicated as narrow, not as broad coverage. Scope clarity prevents the false confidence that comes from assuming a detection covers everything when it actually covers very little. Under real attack conditions, false confidence is a major risk because it encourages delayed action. A core output of analytic testing is understanding the detection's sensitivity, which is how easily it triggers on relevant behavior, and its specificity, which is how well it avoids triggering on benign behavior. Sensitivity problems mean the detection misses real behavior, which is a coverage gap. Specificity problems mean the detection produces too many false positives, which creates operational noise that can hide real signals. Testing should reveal both by examining whether known test behaviors trigger and by examining what kinds of normal behaviors trigger unexpectedly. For beginners, it is important to understand that tuning often shifts the balance between sensitivity and specificity, and overly aggressive tuning in either direction can create risk. If you tune to reduce noise too much, you may miss weak signals that matter, and if you tune to catch everything, you may overwhelm the team and cause alert fatigue. Analytic testing provides evidence to make these trade-offs deliberately rather than emotionally. When you measure how a detection performs under realistic conditions, you can tune it with a clearer understanding of what you gain and what you lose. Another major benefit of analytic testing is that it reveals whether a detection provides enough context to make triage efficient, because a detection that triggers without helpful context is often nearly as costly as no detection at all. If an alert tells you something happened but not who was involved, what asset was involved, what time window matters, or what related signals exist, the analyst must spend time gathering basic facts. This slows response and increases inconsistency, especially under pressure. Testing should therefore evaluate alert content, not just alert presence, by checking whether the detection output includes the evidence an analyst would need for a first decision. If it does not, improvement may involve enriching the alert, linking related events, or providing clear fields that support investigation. For beginners, this is a crucial point because it shows that detection is part of analysis, not separate from it. A detection that provides context is effectively a pre-built case file that reduces manual work and increases defensibility. When analytic testing includes context evaluation, it improves not only detection coverage, but also operational speed. Analytic testing should also be performed with an awareness that environments change constantly, and those changes can break detections in subtle ways. New applications can generate new patterns that look suspicious, increasing false positives. Logging changes can remove fields or alter event formats, causing detections to fail silently. Infrastructure changes can shift traffic patterns, making baselines outdated and causing anomalies to appear where none exist. Even successful improvements, like increased visibility, can temporarily increase alert volume, which may be mistaken for detection failure if interpreted poorly. This is why analytic testing should be periodic, not only performed once at creation. Periodic testing helps you detect drift, which is the gradual mismatch between what your detection was designed for and what your environment currently looks like. For beginners, it helps to remember that drift is normal, and the goal is to manage it rather than to expect it to disappear. When you test periodically, you find drift early and tune before attackers exploit the gap. There is also a valuable relationship between analytic testing and threat hunting, because hunts often reveal behaviors that are difficult to detect reliably, and those behaviors become candidates for new or improved detections. When a hunt discovers a pattern that indicates risk, Analytic testing is how you convert that pattern into a reliable detection rather than a one-time insight. Testing also helps validate that new detections derived from hunts are not overly brittle or overly noisy. This connection supports continuous improvement because each hunt can feed detection development, and each detection can reduce the need for repeated hunts on the same behavior. For beginners, it is important to see that this is a learning loop. Hunts identify what matters, detections are built, tests validate them, tuning improves them, and the improved detection reduces uncertainty in future investigations. Without testing, the loop breaks, and detections become a collection of assumptions rather than a trustworthy system. With testing, the loop produces compounding capability and stronger confidence. Analytic testing also helps you prioritize data needs, because failed tests often point directly to missing or inconsistent telemetry. If a detection does not trigger when it should, you need to know whether the logic is wrong or the data is missing. Testing helps answer that because you can trace the expected evidence chain and see where it breaks. If the data is missing, you have discovered a visibility gap that is now backed by evidence rather than suspicion, which makes it easier to justify changes in logging or collection. If the logic is wrong, testing provides a path to correction by showing which conditions were too narrow or which assumptions were incorrect. For beginners, it is useful to recognize that testing turns vague complaints into concrete requirements. Instead of saying we need better logging, you can say we cannot detect this behavior on these critical assets because the necessary evidence is missing or inconsistent. That clarity makes improvement planning more effective and aligns technical work with operational outcomes. A mature view of analytic testing also includes the human side, because the best detection in the world is not helpful if analysts do not trust it or cannot use it effectively. Testing should therefore include reviewing how analysts interpret the alert, what steps they take next, and whether they can reach a conclusion without excessive effort. If analysts consistently struggle to interpret a certain detection, that may indicate poor context, confusing presentation, or lack of a clear playbook. In that case, improving the detection might mean improving how it is documented, how it is explained, and what investigation steps are standardized for it. For beginners, this reinforces that reliability is not only technical but operational. A detection that is technically correct but operationally unusable still leaves a gap, because it will not lead to timely action. When analytic testing includes analyst usability, it produces improvements that matter in real response situations, not only in theoretical coverage. In closing, validating detections with analytic testing before attackers exploit your gaps is about turning detection from a hopeful set of rules into a reliable, evidence-backed capability. Validation checks that detections trigger when they should, across the environments where they should apply, and that they provide enough context for fast, defensible decisions without overwhelming analysts with noise. It also reveals data prerequisite failures that create blind spots, helps you balance sensitivity and specificity through deliberate tuning, and detects drift as your environment changes. Analytic testing connects naturally to threat hunting and continuous improvement because hunts reveal new detection opportunities, and testing ensures those opportunities become trustworthy signals rather than assumptions. When testing is periodic and evidence-driven, it reduces false confidence and surfaces gaps early, before attackers take advantage of them. Over time, this discipline makes the SOC more resilient because its detections become more consistent, more interpretable, and more aligned with real adversary behaviors. That is what it means to defend with confidence rather than hope, even in a constantly changing environment.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit baremetalcyber.com.